Please welcome to the stage Kana Enomoto of the McKinsey Health Institute.
Good afternoon. I'm Kana Enomoto, Director of Brain Health at the McKinsey Health Institute, and we are an enduring nonprofit-generating entity founded on the conviction that over the next decade, humanity could add as many as 45 billion extra years of higher quality life. Our mission is to catalyze the actions needed across continents, sectors, and communities to realize this possibility. And today I'm going to share work that we're doing with our partners at the Healthy Brains Global Initiative to highlight the importance of prioritizing brain health. Thank you for joining me. There we go. So before we can talk about why we as a society need to prioritize brain health, we need to get onto the same page about what our definition of brain health is. So brain health, mental health, behavioral health, well-being, these are all terms with which we're very familiar. They're nearly ubiquitous in our everyday lives. But while we can all agree that a positive mental state is a good thing, what do we mean by brain health? The way we define brain health at McKinsey Health Institute is inclusive of mental, substance use, and neurological disorders. But health is obviously not just the absence of disease. Positive brain health is a key factor in each person's overall health, and it's fundamental to our ability to realize our own potential. For the analysis that I'm sharing today, we are inclusive of mental and substance use disorders because we hope to do a focus on neurological disorders in the future. But I will continue to use the term brain health. So why are we talking about this now? We have long known that brain health conditions drive about 10% of global burden of disease. But in our post-COVID reality, we see that the problem is getting worse rather than better. Before COVID, nearly 1 billion people worldwide had at least one mental or substance use disorder. And 1 in 6 of all years lived with disability is lived by a person with a mental or substance use disorder. And the prevalence of these conditions have increased 50% from 1990 to 2019. And since COVID, I'm sure we all know that we've seen worrying increases in anxiety, depression, suicidality, alcohol use, and then the negative impacts of alcohol and drug use. The numbers are staggering. And yet, far too often, these conditions go unrecognized, unspoken, and untreated. And brain health conditions can be debilitating. They can also shorten life expectancy. So we know that 1 out of 5 days spent in suboptimal health is due to mental disorder. That people with serious mental illnesses die on average 10 to 25 years younger to their counterparts who don't have mental illnesses. And 30% of deaths due to drug use are caused by overdose. These statistics are staggering and disheartening. But the good news is there is much we can do about it. Attention to brain health has increased. In just the last 2 years, the number of PubMed research articles that mention brain health, mental disorders, or substance use have doubled. There is incredible momentum in the investment community with a more than doubling of the dollars spent year on year on brain health companies. And the vast majority of countries and employers say they are prioritizing brain health in their response to COVID. So what does this tell us? This tells us that we are at a critical moment. We are poised better than ever to galvanize change on this important issue. And while I, as a former policymaker, am guilty of saying that we need more money, money is not the only answer to the problem. While the world has underinvested in brain health, with only 2% of healthcare spending globally going to brain health conditions, when you think about it, 10% of the global burden, but only 2% of global spending. But we're also not necessarily placing the right bets. Only 1 out of 4 countries have fully scaled the integration of mental health and substance use care in their primary care systems. And the vast majority of countries, 90% of countries, spend less than $1 out of $5 on prevention. And that is critically important because of the nature of these conditions, which I will show you in a bit. So for our analysis, we aim to share what is the value at stake by investing in brain health conditions. Traditional analysis would say that while these conditions lead to a great deal of burden, there was relatively little that people could do about it, but the reason that people thought there was little that you could do about it was because they would note that there's inadequate workforce, there's negative attitudes, there are insufficient systems in place in low and middle income countries to address these issues. But that conventional thinking bakes in our negative social attitudes. It reifies the stigma that we place against these conditions and then bakes it into the economic calculations that we would make about why or why not to invest in this space. So we took a slightly different approach in our partnership with Healthy Brains Global Initiative. First, we expanded beyond the conventional understanding of the direct impact of mental and substance use disorders because a significant portion of the burden from mental and substance use disorders comes from the concomitant physical health conditions that people experience. So for example, people with alcohol use disorders are at elevated risk for cirrhosis of the liver. Or people with serious mental illnesses are less able to control their diabetes, and so they're at higher risk for brittle diabetes. Second, we imagined a world in which things like stigma, access, and affordability were not the rate-limiting barriers that they are today. By constraining estimates of impact by the status quo of today's healthcare systems, we bake in these inequities that have no place in a just society. So this figure illustrates that the indirect burden, which is the blue portion of the circle, is almost equal to the direct burden. And so when you take these two together, mental illnesses and substance use disorders go from driving about 10% of global burden to 15% of global disease burden. It's not about just reducing life in years or the disability quality of life, but it's also about reducing years of life. And so after accounting for both the indirect and the direct burden, years of life lost due to mental and substance use disorders increased from 17 million to over 27 million. So here you see the combined burden of mental and substance use disorders in the context of other diseases. The mental and substance use disorders are the second bar. And while this isn't a perfect apples to apples comparison, because this is our expanded definition of burden, you can see that mental and substance use disorders are second only to cardiovascular disease and account for more burden than all the cancers combined. Even if you didn't have the direct and indirect burden factored in here, mental and substance use disorders are still fifth on the list. So here we have a top 10 cause of burden of disease, and receiving only 2% of our overall healthcare spending globally. It speaks to why we need to take a more holistic approach to addressing brain health conditions. So while yes, stigma is an issue, there's also the fact that we may not always be placing our bets in the right places. In the United States and in other parts of the world, we have not scaled what works. So in our analysis, we found that if we actually invested in medications, in therapies, in social supports, in preventive programs, and could scale them to a reasonable amount of the population who is affected by these conditions, we could reclaim 140 to 200 million life years from mental and substance use disorders. This is an unlock of incredible human potential. And we must act early. Prevention is fundamental. As you can see from this chart, there's a lot happening, but the main point is these are the age groups at which burden occurs from mental and substance use disorders. And you can see that the curve here is very early. So we're starting at under 10 and we're going gradually older and older. And mental and substance use disorders reach their peak, 90% of their peak, before the age of 30. Maybe 50% of all mental and substance use disorders occur before the age of 14, 75% occur before the age of 24. And for other chronic illnesses, the disability burden peaks around age 50 to 60. So you see these are diseases of the young, and they last across the working age of the population. So we must act early. If we, as role models and decision makers, make the mindset shift to treating brain health conditions, like my friend Dr. Murthy says, with the same urgency, skill, and compassion as other health conditions, we can achieve these aspirations. This will require investing in outcomes, developing capacity in data, in people, and systems, and finding innovative ways to scale what works. But what could we gain from this? The potential benefits are far-reaching. When we prioritize brain health, everyone benefits. We unlock vast economic, health, and human potential. So if you're excited to challenge the status quo in brain health or learn more about how we plan to add years to life and life to years, please, I encourage you to go to the McKinsey Health Institute website and join our ecosystem. Thank you very much.